Good morning, everyone. Hello, everyone. I am Avantika Arjuna. On behalf of all my colleagues from Asia Let's Partnership, I welcome you all. We thank you all for joining today to this webinar of experiences and challenges in implementing electric mobility initiatives. Ritvik, can you move on to the next slide, please? I represent Asia Let's Partnership and ECLES South Asia, which is a network of more than 1,750 city governments across the globe. And it is also the secretariat to ALP. As you all might be knowing that ALP was launched in September 2012, and it is a voluntary regional network which promotes LEDS GP in Asia. It lies under the umbrella of LEDS GP, which was launched in 2011, and it operates under the 4 major regional platforms. One being in Africa, another being in Asia Let's Partnership, the third one in the Latin American countries, and the fourth one in Europe and Eurasian countries. LEDS GP is the global secretariat, which is hosted currently by GIZ within the Support Paris Agreement projects funded by BMU. And it has different working groups, which include governance, finance sector, energy, transport, and transparency. Ritik, please move on to the next slide. Under the ALP Communities of Practices, we have different communities which include clean mobility, which include transport sector, which includes building energy efficiency, subnational integration, and renewable energy. It has more than 300 participants, which are represented by different about 20 Asian countries, and which include members of ALP Communities of Practices. The major activities which we carry out under Asia Let's Partnership include online learning sessions with subject matter experts. It also includes compilation of different case studies. Under this practice, we also share tools and resources, materials, and different concepts which are easy and which are also useful for different local governments to use on. Besides this, we also provide different no-cost technical initiatives which are supports to different economies, and we also do in-person workshops with peer-to-peer learning, and networking opportunities also provided through this platform. Please move on to the next slide, please. For today's webinar, we are concentrating more on the clean mobility, and this is a part of a clean mobility program under the Asia Let's Partnership. And basically, we are under this program, we are looking at promoting electric mobility. And as a part of clean mobility practice, we have more than 60 participants across this ALP network, which also include countries such as Bangladesh, Bhutan, China, India, Malaysia, Philippines, Republic of Korea, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam. I would like to mention about the technical assistances which are going on under this program. The currently technical assistances which we are providing include the one which is about the public transport, which we are trying to assist the Chiang Mai municipality in Thailand to improve their ridership on the existing buses. Secondly, there's another assistance which is being provided to Sri Lanka, which is still ongoing. It is actually a carry-on assistance which was earlier provided to the government of Sri Lanka last year. It was the framework of electric mobility, but now as a next step, the government is still looking at whether a roadmap should be developed for the country. So that is still the talks are going on. Please move on to the next slide, Ritvik. So about the no-cost technical assistance, as I already mentioned, the 2 assistances which have been provided in the last year include, one is about the framework for national electric policy mobility. This was done in partnership with Ministry of Transport Sri Lanka. And secondly, we under this ALP assistance, another technical assistance was provided to the city of Thimphu in Bhutan, where a scoping of pre-BRTS was done for the city of Thimphu. This was also done last year. Please move on to the next slide. Before we move on to the agenda, I would like to mention that to all the joinees, in case if they feel that any assistance for their countries, if they feel that any assistance is required, they can definitely write to us on the email ID which was given in the previous slide, and we'll try to help you out in providing technical assistance. As we move down to the today's webinar, so we have divided this into different presentations. After I speak, we'll have another presentation from Mr. Nicola, who will talk more about global and regional overview on electric mobility. This would be followed by a presentation from Mr. S.S. Kulratne. We have his recorded presentation which would be played. He is Director Planning from Ministry of Transport Sri Lanka, and he played a major role in formulation of electric mobility framework last year. The third presentation would be by Electric Vehicle Association from Philippines, Mr. Edmund Araga, who would be presenting and sharing his experiences in implementing the electric vehicles. He would be talking more about the private sector initiatives and what all challenges they face. And then after that, we'll be having a question answer round. All the participants are most welcome to write their questions in their chat box, and they can address it to different speakers as required. Can we move down to the next slide? Yeah, so I would like to mention few housekeeping rules. Since we know most of us are working from home these days, we would request, if you're not speaking, please keep yourselves muted and kindly type your questions in the chat box. And you can indicate your questions directly to any speaker you feel like. And now I'll just introduce the different speakers to you. The first presentation, as I mentioned, would be by Nicola, who works with SLOCAT and is a lead researcher for the transport and climate change work. And he serves as a lead in maintaining ongoing overview of electric mobility targets and measures by different countries. So he'll be presenting an overview of electric mobility, how is it happening across the globe. And the next presentation, this would be followed by next presentation by Mr. S.S. Kulratne, who works as Director Planning with Ministry of Transport, Government of Sri Lanka. And throughout his career, he has played a major role in implementing transport sector planning and implementation projects across his country. And he has also played a major role and assisted ALP while formulation of the electric mobility framework for Sri Lanka last year. His presentation would be then followed by Mr. Edmund Araga, who is currently the President of Electric Vehicle Associations of Philippines. And prior to this, he has held various prestigious positions for promoting electric vehicles in Philippines. He is also the founding member of ASEAN Federation of Electric and Hybrid Vehicle Association of ASEAN countries such as Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore. And he has played a significant role in deploying electric vehicles in Philippines. With this, I would like to invite Nicola for the presentation. And after Nicola's presentation, then I would request Dr. Sanjani, who is also the project coordinator for Let's GP Transport Working Group, to take over and facilitate the upcoming sessions. She is also the staff scientist with National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and she plays an instrumental role as a member of the working groups and provides input for all the activities which are being carried out under the Transport Community of Practices. Thank you. Can we start with Nicola's presentation, please?
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. As I was said, my name is Nicola Medimoric. I work on data and research analysis for the SLOCAT partnership. And I'm actually based in Seoul, South Korea. And yeah, as it was introduced, I will give like a couple of global trends and also connecting it to what's happening in Asia, because Asia is a major driver in terms of e-mobility. And I will try to outline a couple of opportunities for the region. So if you can please move to the next slide. Just very briefly to introduce the SLOCAT partnership on sustainable low carbon transport. We are an international multi-stakeholder partnership that enables collaborative knowledge and action for sustainable low carbon transport and brings the voice of the movement into international climate change and sustainability processes. We engage very international multi-stakeholder ecosystem of several entities that work on across transport sector associations, knowledge, academia, governments, multilateral organizations, NGOs, philanthropy, and industry. So it's very kind of a large network of many different organizations, as well as a large community around experts and change makers. And you can find more about us on slocat.net. Yeah. Please to the next slide. And now every time we discuss e-mobility, most of you probably would think about Tesla or electric cars, but e-mobility is a much wider range of transport modes and mobility. It starts with trains, tram, urban rail, you know, like, and all of these kind of grid-connected transport modes are already well electrified or are using electricity as the main energy source. And then we have also, especially in the context of Asia, we have like rickshaws, we have two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and such modes also, you know, have many solutions in terms of e-mobility, but also, of course, passenger cars, buses, some of the major areas. And then even you can go as far as to talk about, you know, like aviation, shipping, and other modes that can be, that have not yet been really electrified, but might have some further solutions in the future. And in my presentation, I have a little bit focused on electric passenger cars and buses, because these two areas are kind of the most interesting in terms of policy areas and in terms of actions for the region and also globally. And here in this slide, you can see in terms of electric passenger cars that we are currently have around 7.2 million vehicles on our roads. This growth, which really more or less started in 2010, is mainly driven by China, Europe, and the United States. And we can also see, for example, like countries such as Norway, that they record already in 2019 that like 60% of their vehicle sales were electric or plug-in hybrids, and even they increased the share this year, in the first half of this year, to 69%. So there's a huge increase in terms of the number of passenger vehicles that we have on our roads. And in 2020, this year, even despite COVID-19 and the disrupted supply chains, there are still estimates that we will have over 9 million electric passenger cars sold by the end of this year. And please, the next slide. So this kind of growth in electric passenger cars is also mainly driven by many very bold announcements of different governments around the world. So in this figure on the right, you can see which, like on the top, you can see which countries have announced certain phase out of fossil fuel cars by certain years. For example, like Norway, in red, it's like the most bold, ambitious country, and it says by 2025 they don't want to sell any diesel or fossil fuel cars anymore. And then there are a bunch of countries, mostly European countries, for 2030 that have this phase out target. And then you can see subsequent other countries. On the bottom, you can see the same timeline, but for subnational entities, which are like cities or regions, federal states and provinces, and so on. Overall, we at SLOCAT, we keep, like it was mentioned in the introduction, we keep track of kind of the national targets and these trends and these kind of announcements in our e-mobility overview that you can find on the bottom of this slide. And we in fact, there's 63 countries that have set a certain specific target on electric vehicle penetration. For example, like they want to have 10% of EVs by a certain year, or they want to have certain number of fleets operated, or a certain number of buses, and so on, these kind of topics. And among these, as you can see on the top right, 19 national entities have kind of announced, and some of them might not even yet translated, but at least they have announced it, they have some kind of phase out target for diesel and gasoline cars. And for example, here later we will hear about Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka aims for 2040 to phase out fossil fuel cars. And yeah, and we have at least 11 cities, but in this subnational entities, but this case is much more difficult to track. So there might be a lot more cities and local authorities that have plans to have cleaner air and better mobility by phasing out fossil fuel cars. Yeah, and then the next slide, please. So on buses, here the figure on the left shows the main energy sources for the current bus fleets around the world, the public buses in cities. The 50% of them are operated by diesel, and then we have electricity around 9.3%, and it consists of electric batteries, so a new generation of battery powered electric buses. And then electricity means in this case often trolley buses, like overhead wires, and that you have in Europe, and in some cases still in North America. Overall, we estimate that around 500,000 electric buses around the world, and around 400 cities employs such buses. The majority of these bus fleets actually still operating in China, like 95%. And the most or the biggest reason why many cities are now switching, and why actually electric buses are very popular these days, is because many cities are realizing that the total cost of ownership, so not like purchase and the maintenance for 10 years, buying fuel, repairing them, is cheaper for electric buses than for conventional diesel or other type of buses. So that's why we see kind of this huge increase these days. In the last couple of years, there were many cities who got electric buses, and we will see more of these in the coming years, because it just makes a lot of economic sense to switch to electric buses in the long term. And then please the next slide. So here are a couple of key opportunities for e-mobility in Asia. And I want to say this is not a very extensive list. It's just a couple of illustrative ideas. There might be much more. And of course, Asia is a huge region. If you go to Western Asia, it might be very much different than South Asia or the Eastern Asia region. But in general, what we can see is we have a very large fleet of 2- and 3-wheelers in many Asian countries, and already like 25% of the world's 2-wheelers are electrified. And so even kind of more like a switch to even more electric 2-wheelers from current fossil fuel 2-wheelers is a huge advantage, and can have huge kind of climate change benefits, which are very important from our point of view. For example, also like in Vietnam, there's a study who says that the biggest mitigation potential, the biggest advantage of reducing emissions can be achieved through electrified 2-wheelers. Then collective transport is very important, I think, to electrify it, because it's not just about adding more vehicles to the streets and to have electric cars driving around, but it's actually about providing a better service and to modernizing the services that currently are in formal or informal ways offered in many cities around the world and also in Asia, so that it's important that we consider, like we'll put a priority on buses, taxis, any kind of shared vehicles, that they become electric as soon as possible. Then we should never miss out or neglect the topic of freight transport. Here, we still have very few technical solutions, and there's still a lot of barriers. So I feel like it's very important to have many pilot projects and to have more first experiences of how to electrify the freights and the smaller trucks and any kind of duty vehicles on our roads. And all of these electrification efforts should be combined with renewable energy and renewable transport, because e-mobility will require more energy, more electricity, and this demand should be satisfied by renewable energy. And please, next slide. And now to conclude, next slide. So so it's not only for Asia, for the whole world. Of course, like e-mobility in general is more efficient. The energy invested in moving a vehicle is much better than for any kind of diesel or gasoline car, and so that's already a huge advantage. But overall, it's very important that the grid and the power where e-mobility or like electrified modes are powered through is also renewable or clean and low in terms of carbons. So that's kind of big necessity for this area. And then what's very important, and we talk about e-mobility, but and it's very important in terms of transport decarbonization, but it's not the only silver bullet. Like, we need to look at the bigger picture, the bigger context of sustainable mobility. We need to reduce the transport demand, or to manage the transport demand in a more sustainable, more comprehensive manner. And this kind of ASI framework, the Avoid, Shift and Improve framework, can be an option, or like a framework that shows you how to really develop the actions for more sustainable mobility, and where then e-mobility would fall just under improve as one of the three major streams of this framework. Yes, thank you very much, and I hope it was useful to hear. And if you have more questions, please you can also email me or ask in the chat.
Thank you, Nicola, for the very informative presentation. We have two questions for you before we move on to the audience questions, which will be at the end of all the presentations. So my first question to you is, many countries in the Asian region have been working very hard at present to control their emissions from the transport sector. And like you mentioned in your presentation, shifting towards electric mobility is one alternative that is helping to control the emissions. At the same time, while countries have been transitioning, they've also noted that there are many challenges that create hurdles for a smooth transition. So my question to you is, what are your thoughts on the key steps that should be initiated by such countries to ensure a smooth transition towards electrification of their choice of vehicles?
Yeah, Sanjini, thank you very much. That's a very interesting question. So, kind of the key steps to kick off this transition to e-mobility, I think kind of the first step is really to set up some long-term targets that support the transition, and that gives certain signals also to the industry, but also to the public, by as I showed in my slide previously, saying here we want to stop the sales of diesel and gasoline vehicles by a certain year. This helps the industry, the local industry, or maybe even the automobile industry that imports vehicles to this country, helps them to adjust the business plans and the long-term strategy, that they also can accommodate kind of this transition, and that they understand, okay, we need to move on from what we have right now and move to cleaner and zero or low emission vehicles. And then the next kind of key step, while of course this kind of key target is just one thing, but it has then to be supported by some pilot projects in order to gather experience from the government, from the industry as well, but also in order, by having these pilot projects, the public sees, okay, here they are testing out this new technologies or these new solutions, and this also brings in public acceptance and makes the public familiar with electric vehicles, and yeah, I think that's a huge help. And the third thing I want to stress is probably kind of setting the right policy framework. So to kick off this transition to e-mobility, at the beginning you need certain subsidies or incentives, certain policies that put electric or e-mobility as an advantage towards over other combustion modes of transport. For example, also in China, we can see they supported very much the electric buses, so that's why there's a huge uptake of electric buses in China. And then kind of this has to be done in the first couple of years in order to initiate a more mainstream transition.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola. That is indeed so. So to summarize what I heard from you, three of the top strategies should be a long-term plan or a vision, public acceptance and transparency through the pilot projects, and third, a long-term strategy through a policy framework that gives subsidies to e-mobility transport modes. Did I get that summary right? Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much. And so I have one more question before we will move on to the next speaker, and that is, so the uptake of electric vehicles are expected to help generate quite a new demand for electricity. So what strategies should a city or a country keep in mind for ensuring an appropriate and sufficient electricity supply while promoting electrification of vehicles?
Yeah, thank you. And it's very good that you pointed out, because it's a key challenge that we, by just transitioning the current fleets that we have to electric fleets, that we won't solve everything, that we will run into more problems by increased energy demand and so on. So on the one hand, of course, it's very important to link any kind of e-mobility initiatives and policies with renewable energy, so that this uptake of e-mobility is supported by an uptake of renewable energy sources and by energy produced through solar, wind, and so on. I think that's kind of very, very important, as I was also mentioning in my presentation. But then overall, kind of the managing of the transport energy demand is very important. So the priority should not be the priority should also be to shift from private modes to public or to collective modes of transport. In cities, then here we can have the emphasis on creating a city with good land use, short distances, good walking and cycling environments, and this also introduces adequate and good public transport. And in rural areas, like non-city areas, then we need to develop some good rail connections. We need to develop some good collective long-distance transport, as well as support this electric vehicle uptake with renewable energy.
Great. Thank you very much, Nicola. And so now we move on to our next speaker. And what we have from our next speaker is first a video of a presentation. And I will let my ICLEI colleagues start this off.
All are welcome. My name is Kula Ratna, Director Planning, Ministry of Transport of Sri Lanka. I am going to present experiences and challenges in e-mobility in Sri Lanka and the summary of framework for electric mobility policy for my country. I would like to mention that having conducted several workshops, this EV framework has been developed by Asia-led partnership. with the support of Ministry of Transport of Sri Lanka. First, we will look at the common transport data of Sri Lanka. My country is an island in the Indian Ocean having 21.2 million population. Our population density is 324 per square kilometer. Land area is 65,610 square kilometers. If you look at sector-wise contribution, energy sector, including transport, contribution to the GHG emission is very high. It is 40% out of the total emissions. You will see the transport sector scenario. Emissions by transport modes, majority is reported by motorcycles and three-wheelers. Road transport is considered to be the backbone of transport sector in Sri Lanka because it is majority used for transporting passengers and goods due to absence of other modes of efficient transport in the country. The total vehicle population is reported approximately 7.2 million. Out of that, bus fleet is 28,000. You will see half of the total vehicle population consists of three-wheelers and motorcycles. Road network in Sri Lanka covered 31,262 kilometers. If we consider the urban transport as increase in private transport modes, traffic congestion is increasing. Vehicle entered to Colombo 250,000 per day passenger transporting. Existing institutional framework for transport sector monitored by the Ministry of Transport under its purview of the Department of Motor Traffic, Sri Lanka Transport Board, Central Transport Commission, and Road Passenger Transport Authorities. As well, Ministry of Power and Energy, Ministry of Finance involved with the matters relating to the transport sector. We can notice that initiatives taken by Sri Lanka for transport emissions present background of EV mobility and need area to develop the e-mobility. Buses, hybrid buses are less amount and charging stations has to be developed in the country. Stations subsidy plan for electric mobility need to be revised. Procurement procedure need to be developed. So, development of EV policy framework is one step before development of electric mobility policy. It would address such an manufacturing and import, charging infrastructure, technology, vision, policy and regulations, institutional capacity, incentives and subsidies, so on. The framework structure, we have to consider the key considerations here. Introducing e-vehicle and development is deployment of is very important in three ways: cluster-based deployment, project-based deployment, and corridor-based deployment is needed. When we look at energy use and challenges, our country mainly dependent on imports to meet the primary energy requirements. Secondly, high dependent on fossil fuel, approximately 46% for electricity generation and other uses. As third challenge, transport sector consumes 70% import petroleum, causing burden on the Sri Lankan economy. Here we have to think rebased charging stations, renewable energy sources and non-renewable sources. Manufacturing industry, if you consider the manufacturing industry in the country, it is near absence actually. Only assembling of vehicles carried out by private companies are conducted. Cost of vehicle directly depend on import tax. In the roadmap, we can consider the use and recycling of batteries. It has to be a main concern, and regulation and policies needs to avoid environmental hazards owing to the remote batteries. Yeah, we have to look at the finance resources in our country. It is limited. to address the funding issues in the roadmap of EV, we have to consider the foreign grant, local consulting local commercial banks loans, foreign commercial borrowings, and bilateral as well as multilateral finance resources need to address. For the EV roadmap, there are several activities. First, awareness program is important, and the capacity building programs, the tax incentives, as well pilot projects implementing, and training programs, documentation, and gradually scale up of the projects. Such area has to be implemented as roadmap. In this program, Ministry of Transport, Power and Energy, Ministry of Finance has to play a major role to establish e-mobility in Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Mr. Kularatne, for that informative video presentation on the current state of Sri Lanka, its goals and challenges, and next steps. So I know you're in the audience right now. I was wondering, do you want a few minutes to maybe add something that you may have, anything else that you want to add in addition to what was in the video? And maybe likely associated with the technical assistance that you recently received, anything specific that you'd like to add, you are welcome to do so. Okay, well, if there are no further comments, we are going to move on to our last presentation, and it is from Mr. Edmund Araga, who is the president of the Electric Vehicle Association of Philippines, and he is going to be presenting and sharing about the challenges and experiences in implementing EV projects from the perspective of the private sector. Mr. Araga, it's your presentation time.
Good morning.
You might be on. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. On behalf of Electric Vehicle Association of the Philippines, we are grateful to be invited on this event, as it is our privilege and our opportunity to promote our advocacy on using an environmental friendly vehicle. First and foremost, would like to give you a brief background of our association. First slide, please. Our association was established in 2008. We're in a group of manufacturing automotive suppliers joined together and established this association. Can you run through my slide, please? Okay. So with this, our mission is to promote electric vehicles use throughout the entire archipelago. And At present, we are of about 54 members, and 6 of which are also included as from the academic chapters, wherein our top ranking universities join hands with us in building this industry. With this Electric Vehicle Association of the Philippines, for decades, we were able to establish a more profound on a regionalized margin. Next slide, please. Wherein we established in 2017 a federation of electric vehicle association headed by Philippines with Malaysia, Thailand, and Singapore to form a regionalized association wherein the promotion of EV industry, networking, and collaboration is our key to establish a very regionalized industry. Next slide, please. So, what to expect? Why EVs in the Philippines? And also what were the industry updates and the policy and regulation updates? Perspectives and local EV parts and manufacturers. Perspective on terms of e-vehicle-based transport operators and perspective on EV charging infrastructure operator. And last would be the bringing EV forwards. These are the items that you would expect on my next presentation. Next slide, please. At the moment, EVs cannot be stopped. Globally, it is really picking up, especially pioneering by China, wherein most of the production and distribution are headed by China, from two-wheel to three-wheel to four-wheel. Next slide, please. So EVs in the Philippines, we have to secure an energy security. As presented by Sri Lanka, we have of the same scenario wherein our importation on oil is so huge that it is one of the top 5 import products that Philippines is doing, and mostly on the transport industry. So we are we are eyeing on this on having a saving cost on importation of goods. Next slide, please. So why EVs? The greenhouse mitigation, we address all the aspects at we are at 20 to 30% of greenhouse gas emissions produced by these different classifications of vehicles. And to address this, we have to somehow look for another venture, which is promoting plug-in hybrids and battery electric vehicles. Next slide, please. Why EVs in the Philippines? We are trying to address health issues. During the pandemic situation, we were able to see the beauty of the lockdown due to the noise and air pollution that was addressed on the months that is being locked down, and there were scenarios that we were not able to fill in any kind of diseases that would emphasize on the COVID virus dilemma. And we would just have to address also our common mode of transportation here is jeepneys and tricycles. Jeepneys are the four-wheel vehicle used by commuters, and the tricycles are the three-wheel vehicles used for short distances. So next slide, please. With this, we were able to somehow compare it to an ICE, wherein there were only 18 plus movable parts compared to an ICE or an internal combustion engine of 2,000 plus, wherein we have to look into this economically if we're going to produce it and manufacture it here in the Philippines. Next is, we call it, we have the advantage of having a lot of sources of nickel and cobalt, wherein we are at #2 source of provider of nickel, and also a source of cobalt mineral ores that can produce batteries, and process it is the key to lower down the cost of the batteries. Next slide, please. In terms of EV updates, at present, there were more than majority of the registered vehicles on the local EVs is on e-trikes, or what we call e-tricycles, wherein it deployed more than 4,000 units already on the road, while others are catching up in terms of an e-car, an e-SUV, an utility vehicle, an e-truck, and e-bus. Next slide, please. This is based on Land Transportation Office records. At present, we have combined of electric and hybrid, plug-in hybrid vehicles in the market. We have the Ioniq, Nissan Leaf, BYD, Hyundai Kona, Dongfang, Jaguar I-Pace, and Chery Arizo 5E. And next slide, please. And on the hybrid vehicles, we have the Ioniq, the Mitsubishi Outlander, which was just being launched this last September, BYD Cane, Range Rover, BYD Tang, and Volvo. Next slide, please. Currently, we have about total of 155 charging pods in place, where there were a breakdown of AC chargers at 126, as being used commonly by e-jeeps and e-trikes, DC chargers at 11, and battery swapping stations with 18 units. Next slide, please. We have this program that is being conducted by our Department of Transportation under Land Transportation Franchise Regulatory Board, wherein the PUB modernization program was emphasized in replacing the old 15-year-old vehicles that was about 240,000 being registered on the road. And on these PUB modernization programs, as mentioned earlier, this is our common vehicles being used by our commuters. But apparently, it was being affected due to lockdowns this year. And public transport restriction was implemented. So it somehow put on a hold, but it's still being used by others. Specifically, this is being appreciated by the health workers currently working into different hospitals in transporting and commuting to their from their place to their hospitals. And then also there in this type of program, there were PUB loan programs that was put on hold, affected by only by 50% capacity implemented by IATF. So the fleet operators were somehow affected on the normal operations and on how to address paying up on their units being loaned to their specific banks. And also, hand in hand, the EV producers were greatly affected as well, as their purchase orders or ready units was to be on hold. But we are looking at it as a temporary, and maybe by 2021 it would push through again on emphasizing and addressing this PUB modernization program that our government implemented. Next slide, please. Well, another thing that that makes the difference is we were able to establish the ADB Asian Development Bank and Department of Energy project, wherein they deployed the 3,000 units that was given to the local government units in Luzon and some parts of in the Philippines, wherein they make use of it as their shuttle services and as for commuters on their local area. This project was supported by the Department of Energy in monitoring all the units that are being deployed and being supported and hand over to the local government units. And also, we are all looking at the one local government unit who launches e-trikes for the sick, food vouchers for the public students, wherein part of the grants being given by Department of Energy and the ADB uses these e-trikes in addressing this uh, temporary uh, program for during the lockdown. Next slide, please. We also have this local government unit who initiated uh, and collaborate with PhilPost as a delivery of e-bikes or e-trikes in the urban mobility program, wherein they spread it to an initial government unit, specifically in Pasig, wherein the units were being donated by a certain manufacturer and then being used as a mode of logistics and delivery of the mails in their perimeter. It is, as mentioned, as locally developed and produced multi-purpose electric delivery vans, wherein addressing the logistics as a key on using EVs. Next slide, please. We are looking at the scenario of having these policies on board, wherein our champion senator, Senator Win Gatchalian, is addressing this by establishing his own bill, Senate Bill 1382, and hoping that this bill would be approved, wherein it packages the incentives, fiscal and non-fiscal incentives, and addressing the roles of government agencies or different departments to address concerns on the industry, address concerns on manufacturing it, address concerns on regulations to somehow make it on a streamline and accept in the market. Demand generation and industry development is at place if this bill being supported by House Bill numbers 4075 and House Bill numbers 4381 in the Congress to make it into a law. If this would be put into a law, this would make a difference on addressing our issues pertaining to the industry. Next slide, please. We also at EVAP work together with the Land Transportation Office under Department of Transportation in having a categories on each and every vehicles being used from two-wheel to three-wheel to four-wheel. Classification, its operation, its recording and registration has to be addressed in order for it to be beneficiary to its commuters and secured safety concerns on roads, safety on road safety concerns. Next slide, please. Into perspective, as EV and parts manufacturers like me, few e-trikes and few e-jeep local manufacturers providing investments beyond the production to enable market adoption of the vehicles. What we did was we addressed first as private sector to put in pilot projects, showcase to different local government units, showing it elevatedly to the national government to see what would be the benefits and educate them on what would be in store in using a more systematic approach of the EV vehicles as a mode of transportation. We were finished with the proof of concept, and we are pushing for a more smart and optimized design and systems. And we have looking at the avenue of the incentives that we can gain from this industry. But where is the market and financing support? The problem is there are no other commercial banks that are open to support on um, financing units being produced that is capable of number of years that would last, and how can it be used to a certain extent. Local manufacturing incentives are needed to compete with ICE and imported EVs. The one main problem that we had right now is the cost, wherein imported EVs have some difficulties of getting paying up of the taxes and the tariffs that are very costly. That's why we can some of our countrymen cannot afford on buying it. And then we also would have to tap our counterpart industry of nickel, which is PNI, Philippine Nickel Industry Association, who are ready to invest on battery cell manufacturings under the right policy climate incentives and demand, wherein if the approval of the bill was put into a law, that would make a mark on elevating it in processing the batteries. Next slide, please. Perspective in the base of transport operator, a couple of more progressive transport cooperatives have adopted EVs, but only after EV supplier provided financing support. So it really lacks on that aspect. Who can somehow help other fleet operators to afford this capitalization on buying these units? So a question is, why should I adopt? Do we have to save Mother Earth because of buying these EVs? Will it make a business sense? Or an e-trike cost 3 times a conventional tricycle should return 3 times the net revenue to be worth it? What are the opportunities and incentives? We address already those, but apparently we have to push further on pushing for the law. Next slide, please. In terms of charging operations, as mentioned earlier, we were about 155 charging pods that was being established already. Only one active EV charging operator from a couple of years back. But we cannot push further on adding more because we need to see that more EVs would be on the roads to back up these charging pads. So will it make a business sense? What government support and incentives do we have to do? Where is the market and how to build the market? That pushes us in addressing the incentives. Next slide, please. So with all this, we identified 4 pillars to bring the EVs forward. And these were demand generation, EV cost reduction, industry development, and charging infrastructure development. With this, the outcome would be on a better energy security, lower importation, more vibrant local economy, lower greenhouse gas emission, and smarter and greener living. Next slide, please. Points to ponder. Demand is equals to electrical e-vehicle ecosystems and investments, and policy regulations and incentives anchored on realities on the ground, which is equals to the demand. And an integrated approach is needed. we are already of more than a decade, and we already established a good market acceptability. What we are looking for is our key that these investors, local or foreign alike, would be supported with certain regulations in order for us to be protected and give value to the industry. Next slide, please. This ends my presentation. And in summary, a decade full of achievements from cooperation and collaboration between government and private sectors, which we are doing right now, helping collaborate with government sectors such as Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, and Department of Trade and Industry in building this collaboration and make a difference for our sake and for our children's sake on what we considered as the next generation. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Edmund Araga, for a very insightful perspective on how the collaboration within your agency and how much forward steps the private sector has taken. And I'd like to ask you a few questions. And the first one is, what do you perceive has been the major step or the role the government has played in enabling the policies and incentives?
Okay.
Enabling you to have the collaborations. Yes.
Okay. What we did was, as private sector, we reached out with the government sectors. We partnered with them in doing a certain programs that would elevate and develop a more precise program that would somehow being appreciated by the market. And with this, we find ways on the solutions that pertaining on the transport sector. We address first on the public sector or the public transportation and elevate to the more marginalized private cars use. Somehow, we learned both private and government sector learned from it with the initiatives of the private sector in having these pilot projects. And through this, we will be able to understand better the solutions pertaining on the road usage, on the road, on the commuters, on which charging pods should be at place, which are the system that we have to change. Those are the things that we try to emphasize that would work on in building an industry like us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think what we're going to do now is we're going to take a few questions from the audience, and there's quite a few interesting questions that have already been entered into the chat. But before we move on, I'd like to invite Avantika of the HLS platform to reflect on the video that was shown by Mr. Kularatne's experiences and status of e-mobility in Sri Lanka. And maybe Avantika, can you come on for a few minutes?
Yeah, thank you, Sanjani. Just to add on to what Mr. Kulratne said, I think I feel that Sri Lanka since 2008 has been taking a lot of initiatives to promote electric mobility. But it has been happening very slowly. I think they face a lot of challenges which the government is now trying to overcome, but still it will take time. But I feel like since 2008, they have some policies, they've introduced some policies which says that they want to initiate clean mobility in the country. If we talk about the national transport policy, which also talks about how can they well incorporate electric vehicles, or how can they promote clean mobility. They, after that, they also had an action plan for Harit Lanka, which says that how can hybrid vehicles be taken up. And the government, I think, also introduced a policy for reducing the import taxes, and that that led to a lot of electric vehicles coming in the country. I think policies such as these have been helpful for the country. And while the framework was being prepared, all these points were kept in mind, and they also have done commitments under NAMA, and they have some NTC commitments also, in which they aim to reduce their targets, especially from the transport sector. And as a part of the framework, there were major components which were taken into account, which he already mentioned, like about the geography, which areas should electric mobility be first promoted, and also about the energy sector. And since we know that there is Sri Lanka has no manufacturing sector now, also everything is getting promoted, and if it starts getting manufactured there only, it will help generating jobs also. And there was another part which I would like to highlight was that while because this is something very important for a country which has not started yet, and framework is something which can be a first step for them to initiate their activities regarding electric mobility. And as a part of the framework, the country in and along with ALP, that formulated, they had anticipated few risks, like we know that technology, this electric mobility is full of technology, and it keeps on changing every day. So they need to be, and they also have lots of commitments which they have made at global level, and they also have commitments for clean energy strategies for the country level. So they need to think about that also. How do they need to manage it, and how do they need to control the things. And also when we talk about technology, which technology they need to take, and how do they need to update. And another thing which the country was, I think, reflecting more was on, as a part of the framework, which was more reflected, was that research and analysis has become a major part when we talk about electric mobility, and which needs lot of funding needs to be allocated for that, so that they can come up with more ideas. And I think there's a university called University of Moratoa, which is already engaged into it, and but it can their existing engagement may be increased by, maybe they can be involved in capacity building, doing workshops for people. And similarly, I think Mr. Kulratne also mentioned, he showed in his presentation that as a part of the framework which was taken up, was trying to deploy electric vehicles on pilot basis in Colombo city only. He mentioned while he was talking about the geography, and then if successful, this can be taken up into other parts of the country. But as of now, I feel that this is going very slow, but maybe if he's there, he may like to answer. But I think they have other challenges, like they want to otherwise increase the ridership of their buses. They want to work more on public transport. That is what they're thinking as of now. But the same public transport and clean mobility can be mixed together, which can be thought by the country. And this is how I think they are planning. And another challenge which I think they face is this lot of multiplicity of organizations, which is also leading to some delays. And maybe now I think the new government has come. Maybe Sri Lanka has new plans how to take up. Yeah, that's all, Sanjani, from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Avantika. Thank you for adding to Sri Lanka's summary of e-mobility. So I'm going to take a few questions from the audience, and I think this can be both answered by Mr. Edmund or Nicola, and it has to do with understanding the life cycle of EV batteries. So, Mr. Edmund, you mentioned that there is significant cobalt resources in the Philippines, and there seems to be strong considerations in trying to build EV batteries in the Philippines, right? And so some of the questions that we have is, what are your considerations for the end of life cycle use of EV batteries? So thinking about second life applications and the ultimate disposal of these batteries. How strong do you think the policies, the waste management, or even trying to build a circular economy around EV batteries? So for instance, for a country like Philippines, if you already have the natural resources, would you think about ways in which you could re-extract those resources from a spent battery and circularize the economy around those materials? And so I invite I would invite both Nicola and Edmund to talk about how are countries moving forward when they think about a strong, deeper penetration of electric vehicles. How do you think about policies around batteries as well? Edmund, shall we start with
Yes.
you?
Yes, in the Philippines, we have one member who was into lead acid manufacturing, lead acid battery manufacturing, wherein he already addressed the recycling of the batteries. He has the capabilities and the capacity of recycling it. But apparently, based on what we have experienced, lead acid batteries is not so sufficient in using electric vehicles, for usage of the electric vehicles. That is pertaining to mostly, like, if you want to run for a more range distance, you should look into a more profound, which is lithium ion batteries or other uh, uh, battery in substitute for the lead acid. Secondly, is that as we were seeing the growth of these EVs, even the recycling of the proponents of the batteries is essential. That's why we have to establish first a battery manufacturing plant that would enable us to address the cost, because half of the cost of the unit is really on the cost of the battery. We have to look into this idea that how can we be able to minimize or be address this issue on the battery itself. In terms of making it into a law, that is part of it, that we have to address concerns on recycling, even if it would take much of the investment, but somehow we look at it as essential on how this supply chain comes in and works together. And as we see on other countries, this is doable. And we just have to look on how we can establish it further here in the Philippines.
Okay, so if I to summarize your answer, what you're saying is it is essential to think about the recycling and the reuse aspect while you promote EVs, right? Because the question of material waste and battery waste pollution
Yes.
always stays. Okay, great.
And
So
also,
yeah,
the supply chain is very important. And we have to address this not only on making use as for the electric vehicles. We know of that one being used already for the EVs can be recycled and used on other source, like for solar panels. It can be used as a recycling battery, used as a backup for the solar panels. That makes it more sensible enough in recycling the units being, or recycled batteries that has being addressed with.
do you have any pilot projects in the Philippines that are currently engaging in such activities with the reuse of EV batteries?
For now, there's the on reusing only on lead acid, but on a lithium ion, there's still none for
Okay.
now, because most of the lithium batteries have a longer cycle time. So even up to now, they're still using it. It hasn't reached its peak. So the usage is still ongoing on the operations of specifically on the E-Jeeps and the E-Trikes.
Yes,
But
makes
that
sense.
is another opportunity that can be somehow being thinking of by out of the box. What would be the other opportunities that can we work on as a business?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that reply. Can I ask Nicola, do you have anything to add to the question about EV batteries? There's been a few in our chat, and so I just want to make sure that I give all speakers an opportunity to share their thoughts on how the role of managing the life cycle of EV batteries is affecting the implementation, possibly.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yes. I think Edmund covered it very well and mentioned kind of the main issues here. Yeah, as was mentioned, the batteries, also the issue is in terms of the production, like the production produces a lot of CO2 emissions and needs a lot of energy. So that's something we shouldn't underestimate. And then when after, let's say when the vehicle is at the end of its lifespan, instead of just recycling is one of the options, but then as Edmund was also describing, the reusage of the battery, and there we can see around the world a couple of examples. For example, some of the used batteries for electric cars are then being reused for water transport, for boats. There's something that is now being tested in Paris, but also I believe in Bangkok or some other Asian cities. I saw I read about these pilot projects, and then also they can be reused for storage, as Edmund was describing, like to support solar panels or support renewable energy. They can actually be, but they don't have enough power anymore for electric vehicles. They can at least store energy to a certain extent and provide it for the electricity grid. So I think these are some of the examples where that reusage of batteries are able, and then recycling. It's still not completely solved at this point, but there are many ambitions trying to look at how all the invested or materials put inside the battery can be again taken out and somehow repurposed in different ways, or maybe also because there's still like many technology improvements, and we will see new generations of batteries that might have longer lifespans and are going to be able to be reused in ways that we can't think of yet, but will be made possible in the future. So there will be still many, I think, achievements in the next couple of years on this topic.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to know that the topic of EV batteries, recycling and reuse is continuing and ongoing. I'd like to now move on to another question. And this question is, if I understand the question right, it's asking which of the modes is, let me get that question. Okay. Oh yes, are there any statistics on CO2 emission reductions from the different types of modes? So, so if I understood the question right, and I am perfectly fine if the person who wrote in the chat question, if they want to turn their video on, microphone on, and ask the question. But maybe this is for Nicola, because Nicola, you emphasized in one of your slides key opportunities for e-mobility in Asia, and you had three major sectors: 2- and 3-wheelers, collective transport, and then freight transport. And I believe the question is asking which one of them, are there statistics to show which one of them contribute at what percentage to the transport-related emissions?
Like it can be as answered completely in terms of in general ways or completely in terms of global values, because it really depends on the regional context as well as how much actually a vehicle is being driven. You know, if you have an electric car but you just drive it like 10 kilometers a week, then the kind of the CO2 emission reduction levels are very low compared to if you would drive it a lot more, of course, instead of a fossil fuel vehicle. So that's not completely easy to answer, but in general, as I was mentioning, in many regional contexts, many countries, actually the transition to electric two-wheelers is seen as very advantageous and has many benefits, and be as kind of the highest potential for CO2 emission reductions. And also, of course, the introduction of electric buses, by because it can also enable a decrease in private motorization use. So to have electric buses at a good service quality will also have good and high CO2 emission impacts. And then freight, which is a large sector and has, is probably as often neglected in terms of policies, and we don't talk so often about it, and trucks produce don't have any kind of very stringent or strict emission levels that they need to keep. So if this fleet can be shifted to more electric engines or electric power systems, then of course it can be a really great CO2 emission reduction levels. And also there's one, it always depends like how you look at it, and of course in the regional context. And for example, electric passenger cars have like up to 60% advantage over petrol or diesel cars in the context of Europe, for example. So that's like one of the examples how passenger cars are more efficient than than the fossil fuels conventional ICE vehicles.
Thank you, Nicola, for that reply. And we are now reaching towards the end of this webinar. So I'm going to ask Avantika of ICLEI and ALP to help us wrap up the webinar.
Thank you, Sanjini. I would like to thank everyone for joining in. And before we close up, I would like to mention that all the presentation and webinar recordings will be sent to you. And there's also a survey which ALP is trying to complete, and it is there in your chat box also, and you can see it on the slide now. It is regarding the impact of COVID-19 on the transport sector. We would request you to kindly fill in your responses in this. It will take just 5 minutes of yours. And we would also request you to join the Clean Mobility Corp, and you can that will help us and help your economy, your countries also, to avail technical assistance. And you can also join for Asia-Let's partnership by registering on the given link. And before we close up, I would like to thank each one of you. I would like to thank Sanjini and all the speakers, Mr. Edmund Araga, Nicola, and Mr. Kulratne, for your presentations. It has indeed been a great session. I hope you would all have learned a lot. All the participants must have learned a lot from the session. And in case you still have questions, you're most welcome to email them to us, and we'll get back to you with the responses. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you very much.
Have a nice day. Thank you.